Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk to you about something out of George Simon's book. George Simon is a really interesting guy. He is one of the only people out there that would actually tell you that it's not completely hopeless to try and work with a character disturbed person. He calls them character disturbed people, people with personality disorders. Not to get false hopes, though, because it has to be done very, very specific way, out of a loving, unemotional confrontation, which he has perfected, and that's what he's made his career out of doing. And he actually has been able to help a lot of people that other people were hopeless. But he is not, I don't think, suggesting to any one of us that we're going to be successful trying to do this ourselves. For us to try and do this with our narcissistic abuser is probably not the greatest plan. But he has this book. He's written several books, but one of the he has like a three-part series. In Sheep's Clothing was the first one, I believe, and this one, How Did We End Up Here? How Did We End Up Here? Is a really interesting book. It says from the best-selling author of In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, and the Judas Syndrome. I haven't read the Judas Syndrome, but I have read the others, the other two. He is talking really about people that have narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, but he doesn't stick with those diagnoses because he knows he actually is qualified to make those diagnoses, but most of us aren't, and so he doesn't want anyone thinking that they have to stick with just someone who's been diagnosed. If someone is pathologically self-focused, lacks empathy, and has all these problems of, narcissism, then that's good enough. And he refers to it as character disturbed, because it really is, from him, he's kind of coming from a position of seeing this as a societal wide problem, and that as a society we're changing and we need to fix it. This is where the epidemic comes from. The epidemic comes from the fact that we don't understand how we're getting there, how this is happening, and we're passing it all along because psychology hasn't kept up. Psychology has not kept up because most psychology is based still, it's very outdated, and based really on the principles that were happening in a completely different culture. When, like, Freud was practicing, we had a real puritanical kind of culture where it was very, very buttoned up and very moralistic, and people were more, by and large, that if they had a psychological problem, it was a neurotic problem. And which is, I've described this before in other episodes, but a neurotic problem is a problem of responsibility where you're taking on too much responsibility. A character disturbance is just the opposite. It's taking on too little responsibility, which is, of course, what narcissists do. Pathological narcissists do that. They take on far too little responsibility. And they, blame everything on everybody else, which is, by and large, impossible to have any kind of real intimacy with, impossible to truly have a relationship that grows and can continue to be a loving, mutually beneficial relationship in any capacity. If that's your parent, your friend, your boss, your neighbor, anything, it ends up being absolutely harmful to somebody. These are relationships of inevitable harm, meaning that sooner or later, you get victimized. Someone gets victimized. The relationships only can continue as long as someone is able to tolerate the abuse, or as long as it doesn't come to a crucial point where the narcissist then discards you. I've been born into a narcissistic family. It took until I was in my middle 30s for the relationship to blow up. And that was because in my early 20s, I got married to someone who would eventually be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. And he came in and triggered everyone's wounds and created narcissistic injuries, created conflict, so that when he wanted to discard me, he could distract everyone and deflect everyone and, kick a lot of dust up to protect what he really was interested in doing, which was coming out of a divorce looking like the victim, keeping all of our assets for himself, all of our friends, everything for himself. He basically wanted to erase, he wanted it to be, because I had a near-death experience. He basically got in his mind, he wanted it to be as though I died. He wanted to keep all the same assets he would get if I died, only even better, because he could continue abusing me. He could continue getting narcissistic supply off of me because I wasn't dead. I was still around. So that, that meant, he could have endless thrills of to the extent that I would engage with him, and he would do it through my kids. So when it comes to these character disturbed people, a lot of us stay in these relationships because we think we're helping them. We think we can help them. Oh, okay, good. Thank you for telling me that you can't hear them. Good. So we think we're helping them, and so we stay in these relationships. So a lot of times we tell ourselves we're the only ones that can help them. And truth be told, none of us do things for no reason. Even people that are empathic people, even people that are good people at heart, we still do things for some reason. We're getting something out of it, And a lot of times, I know for me, a lot of the reasons that I was doing it, and I stayed, I mean, really, I had such a high threshold for pain, and such a high threshold for abuse. I stayed way past, years, decades past what any normal person would have ever been stayed for. There were red flags in my relationship with my husband. Red flags from the very first date. And they weren't even little red flags. They're pretty big red flags. I have videos on my channel. You should watch them. The first and second date, both of those dates, I have a story time video about them. So the first one is called "The First Thing You Did Was Lie to Me," and that's true. The first thing he did was a bold-faced lie to me. He had complete manipulation was our first date. So from the very get-go, and I was writing things off and telling myself that things weren't that bad right from the get-go. And the reason that I did that was because right before I met him, I just made this big, huge move and left everything and some great opportunities in Los Angeles behind to relocate and move to make a life near my family. Because even though I couldn't remember my childhood, I told myself that what really mattered to me was relationships and love and family, and that's where all my family was. So I needed to go back and be near them. And the minute I got back, it was clear to me that my parents weren't that happy I was back. And so that really hurt me. And I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to know that. And so I go on a date with this guy, and I'm not really taking him that seriously. I kind of confess about some of the things that are going on with my family. So right from the very beginning, he has an end with me. He knows from the very, very first date that I've got parents that will scapegoat me, that can be manipulated against me. And he really knows it once he meets them, which doesn't take long. I think I introduced him to them within a week or something. And so, and they're overt narcissists. And of course, I didn't know any of this, but he identified them right off the bat. They're overt narcissists who he flattered. He had them in the palm of his hand, and he flattered them. And then he also, over time, told them that I had problems with them, that I was a threat to them of exposure, which to narcissists, to pathologically narcissistic people, is a threat of life or death. It really is. They see a threat of being exposed, even to themselves, as something they will fight to the death for. Because that false self, that facade, is everything to them. It is what they feel they need to keep going. And it is, and to wound them or to tell them that you see through it or to not play along with it is a huge narcissistic injury to them. They are addicted to narcissistic supply. And narcissistic supply is basically attention. It means they matter. It says you matter. You're important. whether they're getting positive attention or they're upsetting you, either way. So that's why the very worst thing you can do is ignore them. My ex-husband is actually a diagnosed antisocial personality disorder person, comorbid with a narcissistic personality disorder. So he's really kind of the worst of the worst, and that is an actual diagnosis. And my parents, I have a psychologist that I have worked with for many, many years. And over the course of all these years and experiences he's had with them, interactions he's had with them, he feels pretty comfortable diagnosing them as overt narcissists as well. So, you know, these are diagnosed, but my husband actually had a formal written diagnosis from therapy that he and I were involved with ourselves in person. In 2000 and for like 6 months, 2002, 2003 time period. As he was trying to get evidence against me that he could use in court, and was very overly confident in that the therapist was going to see me as a designated patient, no problem. And so he was very forthcoming in these sessions. And in the end, when the report came out that he had requested, it diagnosed him with comorbid cluster B personality disorders and diagnosed me with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. At the time, I had no idea what any of it meant, and I didn't use any of it to help myself in court. I didn't even pull the thing out until after I had been completely discarded and until I had lost everything. And then a couple of years later, I went, trying to figure out what happened to my life, and I started with that report, which was practically the only thing I had left from after my divorce was over. That report was one of the only things I walked away with. And so that was the beginning of how I figured all this stuff out, and how I ended up getting to know so much about personality disorders was that my education starting with that very report. And man, I was in a shock. I'm sure that most people out there, it was a huge shock when I first started researching it, and I realized that other people had experiences just like mine, that these stories that people were telling were just exactly like what happened to me. It was really wild. I know everybody says that. It really is. It was both validating, on the one hand, and on the other hand, also distressing, because you thought you had this whole unique thing, and it wasn't unique at all. You could have been anyone. And that's actually another episode that I want to do. I want to do an episode on why it really isn't personal. Like why it has nothing to do with you, and what that really means. Because I remember when that therapist gave us a report, and he said, really, you should turn your back on this relationship and never look back. It has nothing to do with you. And I'm going, it has nothing to do with me. What are you talking about? He's like, well, it's not personal. I'm like, what could be more personal than that? Than, the fact that you're telling me that my husband doesn't love me, that I should turn my back. What could be more personal than that? But I totally get it now. It had nothing to do with me. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. It would have happened to anybody. It did happen to anybody. He can't love anybody. And same with, my parents. But you're a huge disadvantage when you're born into a situation like this. And this is the typical scenario. The typical scenario is a person is born into a situation where they are abused by one or both of their parents, and they don't know it. They can't identify it. That's all they know. The world tells us parents love their kids. So we go into the world believing that whatever it was we got was love, right? And so even if we're I remember consciously trying to look for a man that would be really unlike my father. Like I wanted nothing like my father. So, I picked a guy who's physically different. His education was different. His professional ambitions were different. Personality was different. Everything was totally different, except for the fact that they both had narcissistic personality disorder. They both ultimately ended up treating me the same way. They both hated women. They both had very low empathy. They both, and there was, I know one of the things was that I had, I had this very neglectful, unloving parents. And I wanted so badly to be like a daddy's girl. I wanted to be like a daddy's girl. I wanted, like people would talk about they're like overly protective. They'd be, friends of mine would be exasperated with their fathers or mothers for being, so overly protective. And that I could not relate to at all, because I had the very ignoring type of narcissistic parents that they had kids, but really it was their world. We were just living in it. It was like they really didn't want to be too bothered by the fact that they had kids. And so we were just expected to act like little adults and go along with their agenda and all that kind of stuff. So I meet up with this man who very demonstrative with his affection. Doesn't have like a lot of education and stuff like that. But I see him as kind of a macho kind of a guy. And in my mind, that tells me that he's going to be protective. But he wasn't. He never was. So I ended up getting treated just the same way. And in the way that he divorced me was just so disturbing. I mean, not only was he not protective, he wasn't even responsible in the least for me or for our children. He didn't take care of us at all. I mean, he really had no problem with, he was the kind of guy that, had we been on the Titanic going down, he would have kicked me and the kids out of the lifeboat and he would have gotten right in it himself. No problem. That's exactly what he would have done. And so, which was just, I wanted this guy to like take care of his, and the things that he would tell me, like he would say things, but if you're a conscientious person, which I am, you're not hearing what they're saying. You're hearing a selective version of it. And this is one of the things in his book here that he talks about, really being careful not to selectively hear what you want to hear. And one of the things that he told me right off the bat was that he takes care of himself. I am the center of my universe. Why shouldn't I be? And I take care of myself first. Okay. In my mind, I heard I take care of myself, meaning me and mine. Like I was included in that. The kids and I were included in that. It never occurred to me that what he was saying is, me over you, me over the kids. It was like, I believe what he was saying was, I've got us. I'm fighting for us against the world. That's what I thought. So, these are places where you fill in the blanks with your own self, and we don't see people as they are. We see them as we are. Well, this is very, very dangerous for an empathic person involved with a narcissistic person or an antisocial person. These are people that do not have any empathy, do not care about anybody's needs but their own, will have no guilt, no remorse, no problem with walking right over you to get what they want. And their way that they look at needs are, if they want something, that's a need. And if they need something, they're entitled to have it. So it doesn't matter if they don't earn it. It doesn't matter if you need it. It doesn't matter if it belongs to someone else. None of that matters. They're entitled to it because they really want it, which means they need it. And if you don't give it to them, then you are an awful withholding person. For you want to hurt them. You want to damage them because you're not going to give it to them. And they really, truly are. There's a joke about that a narcissist will be someone who wants you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Well, that is not really much of an exaggeration. Really, it's not. And when you do that, even that won't be enough. They won't remember you did it. So you can do that, but because they have such black and white thinking, that they'll only see you as good while they see you as good. The minute that they change their minds, the minute that they're bored with you, or they've got some other shiny new thing they're going for, or you see through them, and if that's not working out for them anymore, they need to move on because you're making things uncomfortable. Anything, or you need something. In my case, it was a kind of a combination of things. One was it was been 10 years. I was getting I was dealing with some really severe depression. I didn't know what it was causing it, but he did. It was cognitive dissonance causing it. Was the fact that I was lying to myself about about our life, about who he was and about who my family was. And it was all kind of starting to, the fact that I had built a life on a foundation of smoke and mirrors was starting to come back to bite me. And that's what it was. And he was seeing the writing on the wall. And so when he decided it was time to get out, everything good that I'd ever done for him disappeared. There was nothing good about me anymore. And I believe that he, even this is even true even of my own parents, because he got my parents to also discard me. And even my own parents would want, and this is this is why one of the reasons it's so hard for people that have not been through this to understand, because no one can understand parents that would want to see their own child so negatively. They would want to see their child as hating them, or make up all these really negative things that their child feels about them, as my parents have done, or has done. My parents have told themselves, and my ex-husband has told himself that I have done all these aggressive, hostile things toward them. And none of it's true. I didn't do any of it. Mostly they did it to me. It was projections of stuff that they did to me. But there is no memory of all the good things that I did, all the things that they once loved and appreciated about me. The minute that they had to decide that it was time to discard me, they could only see the negative. And so there was no, there's no thought, there's no, so this is the thing, it's just so hard for people to understand that, we sit here and we pine away. They might have done just terrible things to us, just, such a laundry list of abuses. And still we will have the thought about the time when they did that nice thing, or, they don't have any of that. And we've got like such an enormous amount of abuse, and we've got this little bit of nice stuff that they did a long time ago that we're drawing from, and we're still able to see them like that, and we're able to forgive a million sins, and they really have nothing. And at most what they have is the fact that you have stopped, that you caught on, or you are no longer feeding their false reality, or that you suggested. And well, really, if you had any kind of boundary, if you came in with any kind of boundary, to them that is a big fat no. And a big fat no to them is a rejection. It's a total narc injury. It's a complete narcissistic injury. He's telling them they don't matter. They're not entitled to everything. They're not special. They're not this, whatever. And it can be something. It's like, I'm not going to let you abuse me anymore. I'm not going to. If you have another affair, I'm not going to stick around. Well, here's the really good with my parents. What it is with them is they abused me. They betrayed me. They took my ex's side in the divorce. They did all this really horrible stuff to me. They tried to have me committed. They tried to steal property from me. They cost me a ton of money. They tried to cost me my custody of my children. And ultimately they did help to create a really conflict-ridden, toxic environment for my kids that was impossible for my empathic sons to live in without getting really, really depressed and without abusing substances. And they're all really responsible. The whole situation is responsible for why my son has died, because he died of an overdose in 2016. But he was self-medicating because he had diagnosed CPTSD, who was untreated. But it was all created by this whole situation, created by this sociopathic father who he was so trauma bonded with, and this narcissistic family that there was just no peace. There was no safety net. There was only one adult in their life who was putting them first, and that was me. All the other adults wanted to have conflict with me. It felt good. There were all these. They needed each other to reinforce the lies and the false reality, so they could get away with doing things, because they all wanted to do certain things. Some of them were really, really bad. All the people closest to me actually were involved in doing things that were against the law, that were certainly immoral and not not cool, not nice things to do to anybody, but especially a family member, who was especially vulnerable, who had just almost died, who had, because right when the whole discard happened, when I had just had a major health crisis, and of course that's when they'll time it. They'll time it when you're vulnerable, and that's that was a deliberate thing. That wasn't by any chance. That was exactly on timed, exactly on purpose. So they did all this, and then when the divorce is finally over with, they decided that once I didn't go to a sane asylum. I didn't kill myself. I didn't, I was still around. They decide that it's better for them to have a friendly relationship, because now I'm around. I didn't go away. So if I'm going to be around, politically or publicly, it's better if we have a friendly relationship than when we're around town, in our small town, not having a relationship with them. How's that going to look? So they extend somewhat of an olive branch, sort of, that basically says, we're ready to be friendly with you if you want to just come back and pretend nothing happened. But you have to be able to tolerate the fact that we're going to hang out with your ex-husband and, stuff like that too. And my only thing was, I said, I needed a family too. And I didn't want to be the one who was not going to be forgiving. I said, okay, but we need to talk through what happened. Let's meet and go, talk about what happened with a therapist. And you can pick the therapist, which is not something I would say now, but that was what I said. I said, you pick a therapist, let's meet. And, because they were like ambushing me at my kids' events and things like that. They never said, I love you. And all of a sudden they're yelling, I love you across stadiums. It was just ridiculous. So anyway, so I'm like, I'm not saying that I have to have a grudge. I'm not saying that, maybe I can get over it, but we got to talk through what happened. And just that, the fact that I said that, the fact that I didn't just hop on board with pretending nothing happened, was a narcissistic injury to my parents. And so the story is that I abandoned them, and they took that as a no, because I had a boundary. That was my boundary. I had a no, and that was a huge narcissistic injury to them. And all these things to me, I did nothing to them, but in their minds, they were the victims. In their minds, and they absolutely believe they were the victims, and have even said so to me. So and so, how do you help? Okay, so they're victims, right? So the question is, when are you enabling and when are you helping someone? Because of course they have people, most people in fact, believe that. Most people that, that they will tell this story to become enablers and help them, or help them, but enable them. And so when does it help? When is it enabling? Well, how he breaks it down in this book is, and I think this is really, really good, help is what caring, principled people want to provide to those who have fallen victim to tragic circumstances not of their own making and from which they cannot reasonably recover on their own. Rescue is an unwarranted, undeserved, and often uninvited attempt to save someone from themselves. And this is important for a couple of reasons, because also what you'll find is people, third parties, are really, really bad about deciding who to help, deciding who to listen to. And their judgment is really, really poor here. And what they can write off is, I don't want to get involved with enabling. I don't want to, and by and large, people don't want to get involved in people's domestic disputes. They don't like conflict and all that. A lot of times, by the time one of us is coming to ask for help, they've already probably been involved. People were really involved in things with me, and a lot of times they're involved by being silent. He got a lot of people to help him, enable him in harming me, and I didn't get anybody. I didn't really try very much. You try a couple of times, and doesn't go anywhere, and you don't do it anymore, because by then you've already been through so much. So the few attempts that I made at trying to share with people what really happened fell flat. And And what can happen is that people that that should be compassionate people are saying they don't want to do that. And so really what it is, it's actually them being a little bit narcissistic too, when they're saying they don't want to get involved, when really they should get involved. So there's people that didn't necessarily help a victim when they should have, by being able to say they didn't want to get involved with enabling and things like that. And so the whole point about helping someone that can't reasonably, they didn't create the situation themselves and can't reasonably get out of it themselves. But see, it's hard to judge that. It's really hard to judge that. Us, like we would say, I was just listening to someone else do a show on, how to really know when someone's a problematic person. And truthfully, the examples, the criteria that she was using were the criteria that someone could easily have used against me. So if they're having a problem with all of their family, not just one person, but all of their family, if they have like a really outrageous sob story, but I did have all that, and it was true, so it's really, really hard, because, it is hard to be able to judge. And so, and a lot of times, we really were so victimized, whereas, they're able to be so calm and cool, and we're a lot of times really falling apart and not doing ourselves a lot of good, a lot of favors. And I really did fall into all the traps of that, and not until it was really too late, and all of it had played out in my life, and I had really been just really thrown under the bus. Did I learn anything about narcissistic abuse? Did I learn how to handle myself and all that? I did get the opportunity to, because they do hoover, and one way that they hoover is to take you back to court. And he did come back to me, to take me almost a decade later, tried to take custody of my kids again when they were teenagers, and kept us embroiled in a custody battle for over a year. That was really, really destructive, but he didn't win anything. He never got the upper hand. I put in place all of the techniques that I'd learned, that I talk about here, and he didn't win anything. But I did everything completely different than I did in the divorce. And so, and of course, that's always the thing, is they usually their victims don't have any idea what's going on, and until it's way too late. Usually they've got the discard going on. Everyone's turned against them before they have any clue. They usually got the money hidden. They've got the whole thing in place before, and a person, they've picked someone who's conscientious and kind and responsible on purpose, for a lot of reasons. But the benefit that they have of that is that this person is not going to be thinking in those terms. They're not going to be thinking that someone that they love would do this. They're not going to be thinking anyone would ever do the things that they're doing. The things that I now have witnessed happening to me are things I never in a million years would have ever imagined anyone would do to anybody. And certainly not my own family, my own parents, my own brother, and my own husband. And so, I still have some question marks about things that I would like to get a discussion going sometime about how many people have had this kind of a situation where they had some kind of a scenario come about where their family were really the only victim they know of, where this isn't a pattern they saw their family or their husband or whatever doing to other people. They never saw this. They never saw any inclination, any reason to believe that this was in them. This was even a possibility to be in them. Believed that my parents shared my values, and so the fact that they came out doing a bunch of things I would never in a million years do was such a shock. Such a shock. And and so heartbreaking, you know, so completely, utterly heartbreaking. But you know, to this day, all of them have had far more support and far more help and than I ever have. I haven't received really any support or help from anyone who mutually knew us all, because I didn't try and go do it either. You know, I was like, they were the first ones to come out, and usually the first ones to come out and the ones that come out with have social proof. If, you know, coming out with my family, even though they were already in an abusive family, I never talked about them being abusive. No one knew that they were abusive, you know. And so just him having the support and the backing of my abusive family, of my family, who no one really knew were abusive, people that were paying attention could pick up on it because they were so aggressive. They weren't really like normal parents or normal family. And usually it was therapists who would pick up on it, which is why they don't ever want to go to therapy. But they would, you know, like they would be in certain scenarios and it would be so aggressive and hostile in their way that they would talk about me, and there would really be like no, you know, like, they wouldn't have anything to back it up with. Like, what did she do to you? And there really wasn't ever anything there, really. And so, you know, this would stand out. But regular people were not asking questions like that, because regular people think they look so normal. She never said anything. That can't happen. What parents would, you know, what normal people would ever go and try and would ever be lying about their own child, trying to take money from them or trying to have them committed or trying to, you know, any of these millions of things that they were doing. How many people would would want to do that? And so, you know, one of the reasons for my having a channel, and one of the reasons for is to really bring into public awareness that these things do happen and what really goes on and how it really looks. And, you know, I have to honestly say that I was, you know, beside myself when Donald Trump won the presidency, but ultimately, I think is going to be really good for our movement here, because you know, he is showing. I mean, no one after this presidency should not know what a narcissist is. Even his own kids are not going to make it till the end of the time with things being okay. It just doesn't seem likely. They do know that they have a false reality that they're trying to protect, and they do know when to turn it off and turn it on, because they otherwise they wouldn't know how to be nice in front of other people and nasty to you, you know, in private. The reason that we're estranged is because they want to be estranged. It's not bothering them to be estranged. The only problem about being estranged was how it was going to look. And so if they can make up a way to make it look okay, and so the way to do that was to say, I abandoned them, and aren't they, it's so sad for them, they're such victims. That took care of that. So that was all I needed. They just needed an excuse to make what was happening be okay. Because really, that's really better than having a relationship with me. Because having a relationship with me is too hard. It's too threatening. I'm always trying to have intimacy, and always trying to, you know, have a real relationship and get to know them and be honest. And, you know, it was getting too hard. You know, it was getting too hard. I couldn't keep it on the superficial level. I was starting to, you know, get depressed and have heart attacks. I mean, seriously, I had a heart attack at 33 years old because of the cognitive dissonance of my life. It was like I was living a lie. And so, you know, but that's what they wanted. They wanted a cocktail party conversation, kind of a relationship with me. And so they wanted what they could achieve in the amount of time of one of my kids' sporting events, if we sat together in the bleachers as a whole big happy family with my ex-husband as though nothing ever happened. That's what they wanted. And so it had nothing to do with really connecting with me, really loving me, really caring about me. It had to do with the fact that they wanted to still look like we had this happy family. And it looked better if I could be involved with them all rather than them with my ex-husband without me. But they didn't want a relationship with me. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Talk with you later. Bye-bye.